A Lincolnshire Posy, a lost lady found, structural analysis. Percy Aldrich Granger was a rather eccentric and outgoing person and composer. He disliked that which was deemed artistic, and instead strived towards that which would be referred to as having strength and virility. Granger very greatly enjoyed that which kept him physically active, and much of his work reflects the happiness that moving brought, which he felt folk music best represented. The unique strength and sound Granger sought after, mixed with the happy, active-sounding folk music he loved, resulted in the six-movement piece entitled Lincolnshire Posy in 1937. Granger also wrote strictly for winds, and enjoyed sounds that were less common at the time, such as saxophones, which can be greatly identified throughout Lincolnshire Posy. Despite being born in Australia, Granger emigrated to England with his mother as a young teen, and finally settled in the eastern United States. Granger's time in England, however, is where he initially acquired his great love for folk music, collecting over 300 works during his time in the region. Granger was one of the first to use the phonograph, which he would use to record various folk songs and transcribe them, resulting in the first written version of much of the music that influenced this composer. The greatest portion of Granger's collecting took place in Lincolnshire, for which Lincolnshire Posy is named after, since this is where the song's roots began. Each movement of the piece is entitled after the folk song Granger collected and based it off of. In the early 1930s, Granger grew more and more interested in amateur music and its improvement, which pushed him as an educator and caused him to get more and more involved in public schooling as well as in college-level music. Despite Granger's involvement in the music education program, he disagreed with the education system's rigidness and lack of reception of reformation. Because of this, he spent very little time in the school system. The publication of Lincolnshire Posy, however, was ultimately a result of Granger's involvement in the school system. Originally, this piece is published for the American Bandmasters Association, whose primary goal is the recognition of outstanding achievements in the concert band world. Granger's free spirit and lack of containment is obvious in the unique style and compilation of Lincolnshire Posy. Although Lincolnshire Posy is a multiple movement piece, the focus of this analysis will remain on the sixth movement entitled Lost Lady Found. As was stated, each of the movements in Lincolnshire Posy was based on an English folk song, and Lost Lady Found is no different. The original folk song is about a woman who is captured by gypsies and thus goes missing. However, no one knows what befell her, so her uncle is accused for being the cause of her disappearance, is then imprisoned and sentenced to death. However, the woman's love finds her and brings her back, saving her uncle's life. The frantic feelings of misunderstanding and false accusations are very prevalently portrayed through the quick-paced and constantly moving melody of the sixth movement. Here is the original folk song.
Fair lady dwell, where she lived with her uncle, as all knew full well. 'Twas down in a valley where violets were gay. 3 gypsies betrayed her and stole her away.
The form of the movement resides in an A prime, B, A prime figure. The piece is in the unusual key of D Dorian, allowing for the somewhat mystic and frantic feeling throughout. The whole piece is in 3 but conducted in 1 due to the fast pace. The piece is instructed to be played fast but sturdily, which is very well articulated by the driving force of the bass line throughout almost the whole piece. While the time signature remains consistent throughout, the different beat emphases give way to feelings of alteration in the meter. In attempts to connect the piece back to the original folk counterpoint, Granger's work is comprised of 9 stanzas or verses that are primarily all identical, repeated among the upper woodwind voices to simulate soprano singing voice that the folk song would generally be performed in. The piece begins pure and simple with only the melody performed by oboe, clarinet, and alto saxophone, that these verses are set to and no accompaniment. The piece progresses by adding different accompaniments and different voicings, while still maintaining the overall melody throughout the duration of the piece. The first stanza is unaccompanied, only to be joined by low voices playing on the downbeat of each measure in the second stanza, or at measure 18. The emphasis of beat 1 and the driving nature of the bass line gives the tune almost a swashbuckling pirate type of feeling. The third stanza, at measure 34, is where the A prime section begins, precedented by a change in the accompanying parts. Instead of remaining on the downbeats, the outlying instrumentation instead plays on beats 2 and 3 with an eighth note anacrusis on the and of the first beat. As this emphasizes the weak beats instead of the strong downbeat, the feeling of the piece changes from the powerful pirate-esque tune to that of a more delicate waltz piece. While the bass line remains constant on the downbeat to retain the sturdy driving feeling, the remaining instrumentation brings the focus to the other two beats and away from the strong beat, allowing for the waltzy feeling. The B section obviously is that of the greatest differentiation. This begins at the fourth stanza, or at measure 50. Having the shift be at this point makes perfect sense with the original folk song is considered. The fourth verse is when the lost lady's gentleman caller sets out for her rescue. Instead of having the driving and forceful mood, the song turns more lyrical. The accompaniment to the melody places the emphasis back on the downbeat with a pickup beat on beat 3. But instead of having the drive, it's much smoother and more connected. The piece shifts from primarily eighth and quarter beats to having a majority of half notes or longer in the case of the bass line. One of the other really interesting parts of this section is the voicing of the melody. Throughout the rest of the piece, the melody has remained in the upper woodwinds, bouncing around the flute, oboe, clarinet, and upper saxophones. However, at measure 50, where the B section starts, the alto clarinet is introduced with the melodic line, paired with the piccolo. This gap in voicing is a very characteristic of Granger. Instead of sounding strange, though, the two instruments complement each other, creating a lost and wandering feeling. This melodic voicing, paired with the traveling thirds in the saxophone and the sustained pedal tones of the bass, are successful in portraying the longing search of the forlorn lovers as he searches for the lost lady. The smooth, connected, and mildly eerie tonality of the piece continues with various instrumentation for a while. The melody shifts to the trumpets and the flutes, and the traveling thirds are joined by the horns, clarinets, and low reeds. This goes on until the A' section returns in the 7th stanza or the 98th measure. Hints of the shift are obvious in the 4 measures leading up to the change, as the accompanying voices transfer back to the short and sturdy downbeats as opposed to the elongated half notes. The eighth note Viennese waltz move of the piece returns in the horn section, while the brass once again is placed on the driving downbeat. This continues until measure 122, when a blast of new instrumentation and a fortissimo dynamic level signal a push towards the finale. The finale itself actually begins at measure 130, where the accented traveling fourths, apparent in the high woodwinds, low brass, and low reeds, act as bell tones, mimicking the line in the folk song which reads, "The bells they did ring, and the music did play." Measure 130 also indicates for tuneful percussion to join the ensemble. At the time of the composition of this piece, instrumentation was still relatively limited, and Granger didn't have names for what sounds he wanted to use. The instruments he was referring to are things we would now call vibraphones and marimbas. The ending of the song lands on an extremely satisfying cadence, ending with the resounding tonic chord. The final 4 chords in the song go 1, 4, 5, 1, with the bass remaining in the root. Even though the root isn't the soprano voice as well, disqualifying this resolution from being a perfect authentic cadence, 5-1 combined with the strong accented unified chord changes and various percussive instruments to add color all allow for an incredibly powerful resolution. The unique diversity abundant in Lost Lady Found, while maintaining the bass melody, is such a unique stylistic choice that's very reminiscent of Granger's eccentric and out-of-the-box style. The piece itself invites analysis, and it's no question why the 6-movement work has become one of the most well-known in band literature.